My name is Renee Epstein. The following interview with Raoul Teilhet is taking place on September 10th, 1986 in California. This interview is part of an oral history project contracted by the American Federation of Teachers.
I'm one of the, at one time was a unique citizen of California. I'm a native. I was born and raised here at the beginning of the New Deal in 1933. My mother was a runaway from the sharecropping farms of Arkansas when she was 16, and she worked her way across the country in 29 and through St. Louis and became a resident, and she met my father. She was working at the LA County Hospital as a kitchen helper, and my father was the youngest son of a coal miner family in Wheeling, West Virginia, and Blaine, Ohio, along the Ohio River, from a coal mining family from France. He was the youngest son, and my grandmother always vowed that she'd keep one of them out of the ground. And so the family gave him money to come to California, to the Golden Land, to avoid the dark shadows of black lung and things like that. And there is in my the Teilhet houses in Ohio, you go into them to this day and you'll find 3 photographs on the wall: Jesus Christ, FDR, and John L. Lewis, in no particular order. The Teillets were all early organizers in the United Mine Workers in Ohio. The family split, though, bitterly when my father's oldest sister married the owner of a coal mine. And in retrospect, it was a godsend to the family because he yanked them all out of the ground and gave them jobs up on top. But it split the family bitterly along, and in that community would be class lines. So some of them defected and became stereotyped Republicans, because if you were in business and management, you became a Republican. That was the definition in that community, whether you're a Democrat or Republican. My father never worked in the mines, and so even though he became a baker, he worked for a public agency, the County of Los Angeles, and they did not have unions in the 1930s like they do now. So, albeit both my parents came from socioeconomic backgrounds that would be contributory or conducive to a union orientation, it never was an issue around my house when I was young. Both my mother and father coming to California reflect a very common phenomena of people who come to California. They tend to leave as much of the bad baggage behind them as they can. If my father came out of a family that had experiences in fighting the boss in the coal mines and was pro-union, but when he got here, he was so damn glad to be in the sunshine. And you must remember, California in the late 1920s was really a Shangri-La. I mean, it was, you can look around California and see what's left of a paradise lost almost. But there was just vast open spaces, and there was sunlight, and you could sit on the beach in December and get a tan looking at the snow on the San Gabriel Mountains. And it had a magic to itself that people, and to this day, and I'll reference it later on when I talk about the organizing the teachers union, have a tendency to want to avoid bad experiences of the past. So my mother, coming from a sharecropper experience, which is all she remembers, that it was bitter work, poverty upon poverty, personal and collective humiliation for herself and her family. And there was no organizing. She was fighting. She was a she in a very male world. My grandfather almost disowned her when she moved to St. Louis to go to work. I mean, only women who were headed down Main Street to the brothel would do something like that. And the Baptist orientation was mounted against her. So she got out to California. It was just freedom. And she was so pleased to be here, and she fell in love and got married and became a housewife. That other than the political residue, that she is the only, to this day, pure FDR Democrat that I know. I mean, she really, every time there's an election, she has a test whether how FDR would have done it, and that's how she votes. She just has that kind of orientation because, as far as she's concerned, the Roosevelt administration addressed all the issues that were issues in her life. I had a dinner in my honor put on by the Democratic Socialists of America here about a year ago, and I introduced my mother during my remarks, which is something I loathe to do, but I call her the only pure New Deal Democrat, FDR Democrat left, and she received a standing ovation. Which I think was a response from the people there that they felt something lost in their own political world that I touched upon when I introduced her. She was a Democrat because the Democratic Party that she joined in California and was not an activist by any measure. She just registered and voted regularly. Was a party that addressed the issues of her life. That brought aid to the farmers. The Rural Electrification Act was, I mean, she was amazed to find out that they were getting electricity into Hope, Arkansas, where she was raised. And anybody who would do that was the Wizard of Oz. And she would follow the Yellow Brick Road for that person forever. But she also was scarred, and it affected my upbringing by poverty. It was the overwhelmingly dominant force in her life. Yeah, she is comfortable now, has a supportive family. She has no financial needs whatsoever. But if you'd meet her and talk to her, within 5 minutes she'd be discussing poverty, how she can't afford this, and it's outrageous that people aren't being helped or something. And so she has an orientation for the underdog, the underclass. She identifies romantically with those groups. Despite her background, which would lead a modern social scientist to leap to certain conclusions about her possible political orientation and maturation, did not occur. And I would include my father, who, albeit from a little different background, had the same causal factors in his background, which one would logically conclude to support an activist in political terms. They did not have any political activity in their background whatsoever. They were both registered Democrats, and they voted that straight party ticket, and they both idolized FDR, but they also shared an absence of education. My mother made it to the 6th grade, and my father to the 8th grade, and that overstates their education. They didn't really start any education until they were married and started reading books, and it was very hit and miss background. My father died in 1940, and my mother was cast again into poverty, and she was saved again but saved from hardship by the war and jobs. She didn't have enough skill and background to even become Rosie the Riveter. But it did lead to a second marriage, and she became a housewife again. She married a Republican from Pasadena, and they just didn't talk about politics. He was a anti-Semite. He was a racist, very hard man. And she would, I recall her, she wouldn't try to change him, but she wouldn't tolerate any overt expression of his personal philosophy in the house. She said, you can go someplace else and talk that crap. So we didn't. She had the backgrounds of becoming an activist without the terminology or understanding. And for example, she has 2 stepchildren and 2 natural sons. My oldest stepbrother was one of the founding members of the John Birch Society in Arcadia. My stepsister is a school teacher and what you call a liberal Democrat, but not a radical or activist Democrat. My brother, my younger brother, is a very arch-conservative Republican, and I'm active in the Union and the socialist movement in the United States. My mother favors, without any question, my older stepsister and myself. And while she would be uncomfortable for someone to call her a socialist, she would not be uncomfortable if you describe what the socialist was going to do in giving that person her support. So, and that, in living in Pasadena, California, is a very liberal Republican community. It takes great pride in its tradition. It was originally founded by people from Indiana who came out during the land rush in the 1870s and 1880s. So that Midwestern Republicanism. And they're genteel people. They were landed and well-to-do. They didn't like that man Roosevelt, or Harry Truman was really offensive to him because of his style. But they'd walk over hot coals in their bare feet before they'd do anything that would be awkward or unseemly or impolite. And behind doors in the institutions of the community, they played for keeps when you're talking about power and authority and control of property and money, which I began to find out much. It was a re-education once I was born and raised and schooled and came back to teach, and then to start a union there suddenly got me behind these doors, and I was amazed and stunned at how raw the power was used when their authority and prerogatives were threatened. I was born, as I indicated, was born and raised in Pasadena, and I was also schooled in Pasadena, all but from the first 4 years. But from the 5th grade on, I was schooled in Pasadena, and I came back to teach there. I had many occasions to reflect with some of my childhood friends as to what was it in our respective backgrounds that led us to be a socialist, a Democrat, a Republican, a don't give a damn, a pox in your house, or whatever it might be, because we all came from middle-class families, or lower middle class from our background. I can't think of a single social friend that I had that didn't have that background. All of our families had experienced the Depression. None had fallen from high to low economically. As a matter of fact, they had started low and had emerged into middle class as a result of the New Deal programs and the war, World War II, and moved to this marvelous community of Pasadena where they could live within rock-throwing distance of real landed wealth and commercial success. And but as a result of it, in the same schooling, same teachers, same churches or absence of churches. I'd say absence of religion was one common denominator that we all had. Protestant WASP community, no Jewish community, no Catholic community, good old Methodist. And yet, there's a wide spectrum of social political attitudes that came out of this. And we have imprecisely been able to determine it was by the it's how we saw ourselves individuals growing up in the community, and whether you read, and whether you had a family that pushed schooling and intellectual activity as an alternative, and something instinctive in some of us. If we saw a situation where there was poverty or discrimination, there was an emotional response, where in the others there was either an anger that there was a problem, or they joined in and became part of the problem. It had to do, very importantly, with how our families saw each other, saw themselves. It's a phenomenon of the middle class, and where I grew up, that if you wanted to be involved in upper mobility and move to Arcadia or blocking out adjacent lily white upper middle class, new wealth families, it was just expected that you would become Republican. And there was a social behavior, and you would go to USC instead of UCLA. And there was a whole set of rungs and paths to follow. If you saw yourself differently, then you didn't follow those paths and your political orientation. Pasadena really had a neutral experience in terms of being raised there. The other distinction that led to the evolution of, I guess where we're going is how a clean-cut kid from Pasadena can become a union socialist organizer is education and its impact. I mean, the earliest things I can remember reading before I should have probably been reading them were things like Steinbeck and the Grapes of Wrath, because my mother said I must read this. It's about your kinfolk, and all my relatives on my mother's side, who we associate with much more than my father's side, were all dirt farmer, southern drawl. Other than their attitudes on race, were just salt-of-the-earth Democrats and pro-union. They all worked in Lockheed or in steel mill here in Southern California, were members of the Steel Workers Union or the Machinists Union. And so the union came through as a very positive word, and it was reinforced by reading and going to school. And Pasadena had a very progressive liberal education system, which was the pride and joy of the Republicans, to be on the cutting edge of John Dewey and progressive education. And with great irony, they were planting the seeds of people who would come out of this experience with a set of values that were anathema to what they intended. So that was probably one of the distinctions in bringing about change. However, when I hasten to add that when I started teaching at Pasadena High School, I'd never heard of a teachers union before. I thought AF was the other end of a ship. Just the furthest thing from my mind was union. I'd worked as a Teamster when I worked going through college. I carried a Teamster card. I carried a laborer's card in the craft unions, working in the summertime. I got a machinist card at Lockheed when I worked there at night. But I did not have the least any intention of organizing a union or becoming a member of one. The There was a break in my life called the Korean War. I drifted. The Pasadena school system was the last that was known as the 644 plans, where the community college was part of the unified school district, and you actually, your last 4 years from your junior in high school, the 11th and 12th grade, and the first years of college were in one school and one continuous experience. If you were highly structured, disciplined, and had a positive home, positive by the sense a supportive, structured home to help you with your schoolwork, it was a marvelous system. If you were not, the potential for disaster and disorientation and mischief were enormous. And I went the latter course. I went to my first years of college. I didn't complete but one semester, and I think I got 3 units of F and 3 units of C. I just was on freedom without structure. When you didn't have to attend classes in the 11th grade, my peer group opted for the streets, and we played ball and just got ourselves in trouble. The 644 plan failed because of students like myself, and the community pressure to bring about that change. So my school, from the last 2 years of high school, were marginal, and my first years of college were a disaster. And when President Truman sent me a letter offering me an alternative lifestyle in the Korean War, it was readily accepted. I wasn't patriotic. I knew where Korea was. We didn't. Looking back on my extremely activist anti-war activities in the Vietnam War, I sometimes marvel at how easily I walked off to Korea without the slightest question. I just got a letter, and the president had called, and we left. The Army experience didn't have any particular bearing on developing a Union consciousness. It developed a great distaste for unrestricted authority. But what it did, again, with the irony of the Pasadena Republicans developing a progressive school system for us to become socialist and trade unionists, and the Army experience gave us the GI Bill, which was a second chance for so many of us that had stumbled, without which there isn't the slightest doubt in my mind I would have never completed college. It was a marvelous program, and it gave us a new start. I went back to school, and it was a maturation to overcome my problems, and I was deadly serious about it. I was 21 years old, a freshman in college, and went at it rather seriously back through Pasadena City College, which was an independent community college at that time, and on to Cal State Los Angeles, where I completed my BA and MA in history. And really didn't start teaching until I was 26 or 27. The selection of teaching, again, as a happenstance of a romantic education. I always loved history and read it avidly. And if you stop and think about it, what do you do with a history major? You either use it as a foundation of going into law or the State Department, and Harvard had the monopoly on that program. I thought of using it to go into law school or become a librarian, or in the interim while you're trying to make up your mind, you can teach. And it just seemed amazing to me that someone would pay me to stand up and talk about what I considered to be a hobby, a personal interest. But they said they'd give me $5,500 a year if I would do that in Pasadena. And so I was deciding whether to go into law school or not. I went back and started teaching. Pasadena High School in 1959-1960 was the perfect image of the good high school in the movie The Blackboard Jungle. It was 97% white. It was predominantly upper middle, or lower upper class. 93% of the student body matriculated to college, either junior college or to university. It was a brand new school, sparkling. It had a young faculty, where 40 was considered old. It had all the money it needed and community support for materials. We had large classes, but nobody knew anything different. And we came into teaching. I say we from habit now, but we started thinking collectively at that time. My colleagues had not come into education with any intention of making money. We'd all had been drilled into our heads in the teacher preparation programs that money was not a goal of a teacher, but it was a wonderful place to teach. Vandalism was unthought of, truancy was unheard of, absenteeism was rare, assignments, anything less than 100% was worth talking about at lunchtime, highly motivated students, polite, rub-a-scrub-dub. It was just a wonderland. And hardly the environment, in retrospect, that one would think would prove to be a fertile field for union organizing. But almost immediately, problems began to develop that became issues that became the motivational causes for the organization of the teacher union movement. Union was unknown by any of us. Going through California teacher training program, not only did they not mention the AFT or teacher unionism or the word union, there was a concerted effort organized and funded by the National Education Association to condition you into becoming an NEA member as soon as possible. They had literature in all the classes. They had domination of bulletin boards. The professors flat out told you that it was important for you to join the NEA, the professional organization that would be part of your evaluation and would help you achieve tenure. So there was a tremendous conditioning process and an awareness built up. It wasn't even an issue. When I went met with the director of personnel in Pasadena to sign my, if you don't mind the euphemism, contract, at the time it was a work permit, he handed me a membership application in the Pasadena Education Association, CTA NEA, and on the application for the job, in bold black letters, it said, "If employed, would you be willing to join the NEA, CTA, PEA?" And there were two boxes, yes and no. And my mother didn't raise a dumb kid, and I knew questions in bold print were important. And the yes answer had been pre-programmed into my mind in the teacher training institution. And for some strange reason, 100% of the teachers in Pasadena, some 1,200 at the time, were all in the NEA. I didn't have the slightest problem with checking yes, the box yes, and signing the membership card. There was a credit union application. That the word union was involved in my first job as a teacher, because I thought that the NEA was a union. I mean, it just never crossed my mind that it was anything else. I thought they used it was part of the double talk of public education that I've gotten used to, that people seem to use words that didn't mean anything or words that meant something other than what they should have meant. I had, going through college, had worked in factories and had been a machinist, carried an IAM card, had carried a Teamster card at a creamery. I drove a route there. I knew what unions were, and I assumed that this was an employee organization, And I was joining, it kind of caught my fancy, was that the director of personnel was signing me up in the union. And I thought, this must be the first, this is what they talk about, company unionism. This is a real company union. And I kind of looked at it with a detached interest as to how it was going to work out. It worked out, it began to reveal itself almost immediately